Tonight isn't for sleeping, it's for remembering. The weight of a shirt she left on your floor, the sound of heels on your hallway, stopping just outside your door, the ink from a letter that never made it to the postbox, but marked your skin anyway. I'll whisper you 3 stories. Each one begins with silence and ends where breath meets bare skin. So lie back, loosen what's holding you, and let me begin. The porcelain cup sat on the 3rd shelf of the cabinet, always there, untouched. It was the only thing in the kitchen that didn't gather dust, not because I cleaned it, but because I couldn't bear to. There was still a faint kiss on its rim, smudged rose-colored lipstick, left exactly where she had placed her mouth that morning. The only morning we ever shared. I didn't wash it, and I never used that cup again. I was 55 when I bought this apartment. Now, I'm 86, and I still remember the way the door creaked open that night. It was raining. Not the romantic kind of rain, but a howling, sideways, slashing storm that made you feel like the whole world was trying to come undone. She knocked only once. I thought it was the wind. But there she stood, soaked, breathless, and holding a brown paper bag to her chest, like it was the only thing left in the world that belonged to her. Her dress clung to her like sorrow. Her eyes didn't plead. They asked quietly, "Can I come in, just for the night?" She didn't have to explain. Not really. You could see the reason trailing behind her like a broken hymn. A lost girl, maybe 24 at most, walking alone in a city that didn't care what time of night it was. And I, a man past the season of mistakes, said yes, without words. We didn't speak much. I made her tea. She took it with honey. I remember that. Not sugar, not lemon, just honey. I had to dig out an old jar that had crystallized at the bottom, but she smiled like it was the finest thing she'd ever been given. That smile, it wasn't flirtatious, it wasn't grateful. It was tired, and it was real. I gave her the guest towel and told her she could dry off in the bathroom. She went in, then came back out wearing only my oversized flannel shirt, red and navy plaid, the one I still wear sometimes when the house gets too quiet. Her hair dripped a little on the hardwood. She padded barefoot to the couch, curling up without asking for a blanket. I watched her from the kitchen. Her knees were drawn up. Her fingers rubbed the edge of the fabric like she was memorizing it. And her lipstick, that deep, faded rose, was still perfectly in place, as if the storm hadn't touched it. I asked her name. She told me one. I don't think it was real, but it didn't matter. I asked no more questions. We sat in silence for a long time. The rain softened, the wind didn't, and somehow the world inside my apartment grew warmer, not from the heater, but from her presence. Not romantic, not even intimate yet, just present. At some point, I brought out an old record player. I don't know why. Maybe because silence sometimes feels heavier than noise. I put on a jazz record, slow, brushed drums and a trumpet that sounded like it had been loved too much. She didn't say anything, but she closed her eyes. And for a moment, just a moment, she let her head rest against the arm of the couch, and I saw her mouth move. She was mouthing the lyrics, not singing, just shaping the words with her lips. And I wanted to ask, "Who are you really?" But I didn't, because I knew she wouldn't stay if I did. When it got late, I offered her the bed. She shook her head. She pointed at the couch, already half asleep. So I just nodded and walked to the bedroom. But I didn't sleep. Not really. I left the door ajar, just enough to hear if she cried. She didn't. She breathed softly. No rustling, no movement, just steady breath, like waves kissing a faraway shore. In the morning, I woke up to the smell of tea. She was gone. The front door was locked from the inside, which meant she had slipped out silently, like a ghost. But the kitchen told me she had been real. The teacup, that white porcelain with a single blue ring, sat on the table. Her lipstick was still on the rim. Not a print, not a smudge. A full, perfect imprint, as if she had pressed her lips to the edge and left something of herself behind, on purpose. A signature, a thank you, a goodbye. I didn't chase her. I didn't call the shelters or check the hospitals, because some people aren't meant to be found. They're meant to pass through your life like weather, sudden, undeniable, and unforgettable. She left no note, no name, just her lipstick, and the shirt, folded neatly at the foot of the couch. She had put her own clothes back on. I never saw her dress again, but I still have the flannel shirt, still wear it sometimes, still remember. 30 years later, that cup hasn't moved. Neither has the imprint. Sometimes, I wonder what happened to her. Was she running from someone? Was she looking for something? Or was that night simply a pause, a breath she needed to take before life dragged her back into its storm? I'll never know. But I think she meant to be remembered. And I have remembered. Every night the wind howls against my windows, I remember. 3 decades is a long time to live with a single night. But some nights settle in your chest, like dust on old books. You don't see them every day, but when the light hits just right, there they are. Soft, stubborn, impossible to shake. That morning, I didn't touch the cup, didn't wash the shirt, didn't open the window, even though the apartment smelled faintly of jasmine and rain-damp wool. I just stood at the threshold of the living room where the couch still bore the gentle imprint of her sleep. The pillow was slightly indented, a single hair, long, dark, curved like a question mark, clung to the fabric. She was gone, but her absence filled the room more completely than her body ever had. I poured myself tea. I didn't drink it. Years passed in increments, in rituals. I started walking every morning, same block, same time, same cafe on the corner where the barista knew me by name, but never asked questions. Sometimes I sat by the window, not because I expected to see her, but because part of me feared she might pass by and I wouldn't recognize her. That's the strangest thing about people who vanish. They age in your memory, even if you don't want them to. I imagined her hair streaked with grey, her eyes still serious, still tired, maybe with new lines around them, the kind that come from squinting into too many unknowns. But I never saw her again, not once. I did, however, see her reflection. Not often, but sometimes. Late at night, usually in the mirror above the fireplace, where the light from the street lamps outside dipped in just right to illuminate the living room. I'd be walking past on my way to the kitchen, and there, flickering, would be a silhouette. Bare shoulders, a sliver of leg curled under the oversized shirt. A girl, not a woman, not anymore, but a girl frozen in time, curled on the couch, like she'd never left. I didn't believe in ghosts, still don't, but I never repainted that wall, never covered the mirror, because part of me wasn't sure if I'd imagined it, or if she was still somehow there, in the folds of memory, too gentle to haunt, but too stubborn to disappear. One night, 10 years after she'd gone, I had dinner with a woman. Her name was Elise, a kind widow, 2 grown children, laughed often, wore perfume that reminded me of orange blossoms in spring. She touched my wrist as we sat across from each other at a quiet bistro. "You always look like you're about to remember something," she said. I smiled politely. "I'm just slow," I told her. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, I was still waiting, not for the woman to return, not really, but for the feeling she left behind, that haunting, impossible stillness, that sense that someone had slipped into my life and rearranged something internal without breaking anything, just quietly, repatterning the air. I didn't see Elise again, not because I didn't like her, but because I realized, sitting across from her, that the table felt too clean, too tidy, too untouched. There was no lipstick on her cup, no borrowed shirt on my floor, no mystery in the way she looked at me, and I wasn't ready to let go of mystery. 15 years passed, then 20, then 25, and still, the cup stayed where she left it. I moved it once, just to dust, but my hands trembled and I set it back quickly, like it might shatter if I disturbed it too long. Funny how we protect the past like it's made of porcelain. On my 79th birthday, I found a letter, not in the mailbox, not in an envelope, but inside a book I hadn't opened in years. It was The Collected Poems of Neruda, 2nd edition, hardcover, spine frayed at the edges. Tucked between pages 112 and 113, there it was. A note, written in small cursive, not signed, but unmistakable. "I used your toothbrush that night. I hope you don't mind." It was the first time in months I didn't taste him when I smiled. "You didn't ask why I came. That's why I stayed, and why I left. Thank you for not touching me, and for everything else you didn't do." I sat down slowly, hands shaking. The paper smelled faintly of jasmine. I read the letter again the next morning. Then I read it again a year later. Each time, I noticed something new. The way she dotted her is with tiny slashes, not circles. The hesitation in her second sentence, how she nearly crossed it out. The way she never said my name. Just like that night. She had entered my life like a borrowed song, brief, haunting, and lingering in the walls long after the music stopped. And still, she hadn't taken anything. She left no earrings, no scarf, just the shirt, the cup, the note, folded so tightly it left creases I couldn't smooth out. And yet, she left so much. An imprint, presence, a version of myself that never existed before her. Last year, my nephew visited from out of town. He's 32, sharp, cynical. He noticed the cup. "Why don't you throw that thing out? It's stained." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "It's the most honest thing I own." He laughed, not unkindly, and moved on. But I noticed that when he left the room, he didn't touch it. No one ever does. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd asked her to stay. If I'd made room in the dresser, offered her half of the bathroom shelf, bought her a second toothbrush. But then I realized it wouldn't have been her. She came as a question, not an answer. And questions don't settle. They hover, and they haunt, and they keep you alive. They say red lipstick fades by noon, but hers never did. Not on the rim of my cup, not from the collar of my shirt, and certainly not from the memory that bloomed, slowly, deeply, in the folds of time. I should have wiped the cup clean. I should have done laundry. Should have lived like a man not still haunted by a pair of lips that barely said anything, but somehow touched everything. But I didn't. Because letting go isn't always about strength. Sometimes it's about not wanting the wrong things to disappear. A decade after the letter, I moved. New apartment, smaller, 1 bedroom, the kind of place people call just enough. It had better light, a balcony, and a mirror that didn't know her. I left the couch behind, the one she had slept on, but I brought the cup. I brought the book of Neruda poems, and I brought her lipstick. Yes, I still had it. A small gold tube, faintly dented on one side. The color, still rich, a deep wine red, like the kind of kiss that leaves a stain you don't want to wipe away. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because it was the only thing she'd touched that touched me back. One evening, I opened the tube, not to wear it, but just to look, to remember how it had looked, smudged across her bottom lip, half smeared from sleep, and the way she tucked her mouth into the pillow. I held it near my mouth, imagined what she might have looked like leaning over the bathroom sink, applying it slowly, carefully, one corner at a time. Then I did something I hadn't done in 40 years. I wrote her name on a napkin, just her first name, softly in pen. Underneath, I wrote one sentence. I still haven't touched the cup. I folded it once, then again, tucked it inside the lipstick tube like a time capsule. Then I set it back inside the drawer and closed it gently. A year later, I met someone, not in the romantic sense, but in the kind you don't expect at the corner of a used bookstore. She was young, mid-30s maybe, and worked there part-time. Her name was Anya. She wore glasses that slid down her nose and boots that creaked. One afternoon, she noticed the Neruda book I'd pulled from the shelf and smiled. "My grandmother loved him," she said. "Used to read it aloud while brushing her hair." I nodded. Then, without quite knowing why, I opened the book to page 112 and froze, because the letter wasn't there, not the one she'd left me, but something else, another letter. If you're reading this, I hope the mirror still remembers me. I hope the cup's still on the counter. and I hope you never stopped writing poems you didn't sign. It wasn't her handwriting, but the ink looked old. Anya noticed my silence. You okay? I looked at her, really looked. She had her hair tied up, wore no lipstick, but something about the way she watched me, soft, patient, curious, reminded me of that night. Who gave you this book? I asked. She blinked. It came in a donation box last month. Some estate sale, I think. Do you remember the name? She shook her head. Only that there was a scarf in the box, burgundy, smelled like jasmine. I stared down at the page again. Then slowly, I closed the book, paid for it, and left. That night, I sat by the window, held the book in my lap, held the cup in one hand, and placed the lipstick tube next to me on the windowsill, like a relic. The sky was deepening, streetlights flickered, and in the reflection of the glass, I saw her again. Not the young woman she had been, but the version of her that had existed in me all this time. No longer a girl, no longer a mystery, just a shape carved gently into the soft walls of memory. I didn't cry, but I did say her name out loud. Once, quietly, like an incantation, or a thank you. Later that year I started writing again. Nothing fancy, just small things. A sentence or two on a napkin, a note tucked into a drawer, a poem scratched into the back of a receipt. Most I never read again, but one I framed. It hangs by the mirror now. It says, she didn't need to stay. She only needed to arrive and leave something behind that no one else could touch. The lipstick dried out before the memory did. The wax cracked a little in the tube. The scent of jasmine faded into something closer to dust. But I kept it anyway, in the same drawer, in the same gold case, beneath a napkin I never dared unfold. There was a quiet dignity in leaving it untouched, like honoring the silence between two lines of poetry. I never tried to find her again. Not online, not through friends, not even on old train manifests from the year she left. And yes, I checked, because she hadn't vanished. Not really. She had simply become a presence, the kind that lingers in the steam of a morning shower, or in the half light before sleep, in the flick of a lighter, the pause before music begins, or the lip of a glass you don't dare wash. One spring morning, decades later, I stood before a mirror in the guest room of my niece's house. I was older now, lines tracing along my mouth like the ghosts of every word I hadn't said. She knocked gently. Uncle? I turned. Yes? Do you want me to pack up the drawer too? She pointed to the bedside table. I shook my head. Just leave it. There's only one thing in there. She smiled. I figured. Lipstick, right? I froze. How did you know? She shrugged. You always write about it in your journals. I didn't know she'd read them, but maybe I'd always written them hoping someone would. Years passed, and one night, alone in a small house tucked behind a garden she would have loved, I felt it again. The absence of her, but also, strangely, the fullness of her too. It wasn't regret, not anymore. It was something softer, like the ghost of music after a dance has ended. That night, I poured a glass of wine, red like her lipstick. I opened a fresh page in a leather-bound notebook, and I wrote something I hadn't written in years. I think you left the lipstick on purpose. Then I wrote, I think I loved you more in your absence than I ever could have in your presence. Then, simply, I still see your mouth in the mirror sometimes. I set down the pen, and in a strange flicker of impulse, I reached for something at the edge of the desk. The gold tube. Still here. Still hers. Still, somehow, mine. I uncapped it, held it in my fingers, and for the first time, I wrote her name across the mirror in red. Not in cursive, not neat, but boldly, slowly, like it had waited years to be spoken, not as a whisper, but as a mark, a declaration, a memory bleeding into reflection. And when I stepped back, the mirror gave me what I hadn't expected. Not her, not me, but both of us, blended, older, yes, but never faded. The next morning, the name was gone, wiped clean by the sun. But something stayed. A faint outline, a suggestion, a lip-shaped echo in glass, like a kiss left just outside time. It wasn't a kiss that made me stay, not at first. It was the sound of porcelain against his countertop, the way the kettle exhaled before it boiled, the stillness in his apartment, a kind of hush that knew how to hold people gently. I'd only meant to drop off the book he lent me, and I did. I placed it right there on his desk, spines aligned, no note, no flourish, just something casual, neat, unemotional. But when I turned toward the door, his voice trailed behind me. You remembered where my keys go. I stopped. I hadn't even thought about it. The little ceramic dish near the shelf, with a chipped corner shaped like a heart. I had put them there by habit, just like before. I guess I did, I said. He didn't move, didn't come closer. He just leaned against the doorframe of the kitchen, one hand wrapped around a mug he hadn't drunk from yet. The tea inside was going cold. I could feel him watching me, but not in that hungry, impatient way. No, it was softer, like he was memorizing something, or maybe trying not to. I'm not staying, I said, as if he needed reminding. I know, he said, nodding, the kind of nod that held more weight than it should have, and yet neither of us opened the door. The apartment looked the same, but different too. There was no jacket draped over the sofa anymore. The painting of the girl with a violin had been rehung, straighter, like he was trying to fix the angles of the past. And the candles, the ones I bought on impulse at the Christmas market in Prague, were still lined up along the windowsill, burned halfway. Still here. So was I. He tilted his head. You're wearing that scent again. Is that a problem? It's just specific. I knew what he meant. There were perfumes that say new. Mine always said, remember. I should go, I whispered, even though I hadn't taken a single step. but I clutched my bag like I was about to, like I might, like I could. He nodded again, this time slower, but something in the silence cracked open, like the hinge of an old drawer he hadn't touched in a while. You remember what you said the last time you left? He asked. My throat caught. I remembered every word, every pause between them. But I played dumb. No. You said, don't wait up. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then you never came back. I didn't expect you to wait. I know, that's why I did. That stopped me. Not the meaning, the honesty. It was like he was still holding the space I used to fill, without trying to refill it, just leaving it there, open, untouched, mine. The kettle clicked off behind him, steam curled in the air like a breath unsaid. And then, out of nowhere, he said, I keep your mug. I blinked. What? You know, the one with the chipped rim. You always turned it so you wouldn't drink from the crack. I tried to speak, failed. I keep it in the back of the cabinet, he said, so no one else uses it. I looked at him, and suddenly it wasn't the scent, or the mug, or the keys that made me linger. It was the way he said everything, without saying it. I don't know what you want me to do with that, I finally said. Quietly. He shrugged. I don't either. And still, the silence thickened. It wrapped around us like the heavy cotton of his old bed sheets, the ones that smelled like cedar and rain. I realized I missed that smell. I missed noticing things. I really should go, I said again. But this time, he didn't nod. He just stared at the door behind me, like maybe if he didn't look at me, I wouldn't leave. Or maybe it would hurt less when I did. So I turned to open it. The lock clicked. The air from the hallway spilled in, colder, sharper. I stepped 1 foot across the threshold. Then I paused. And that's when I heard it. Not words, just his breath hitching. Like his body wanted to say something his lips wouldn't allow. I turned back. And there it was. The moment between go and stay, between pride and pleading. He didn't say, don't go. But the space between us did. And somehow, that said more than a whisper ever could. I didn't come back inside. Not exactly. But I didn't walk away either. I stood in the hallway, just outside his apartment, fingers still resting on the doorknob. The air out there was different. Not just colder, but emptier. Like it didn't know what to do with me, and neither did I. He hadn't followed, didn't rush to the door, but he hadn't moved away either. He was still there, one arm braced on the edge of the kitchen wall, the other holding that mug he never drank from. Watching, waiting, breathing. It was strange how loudly I could hear that from here. I just need a minute, I called out, as if I was explaining something more complicated than the obvious. He nodded from the doorway, that small, reluctant nod men give when they know a woman is about to lie to herself, and they're choosing to let her. I leaned my back against the wall. The corridor light above buzzed. Someone's dog barked 3 floors below. A baby cried somewhere behind me. But inside that apartment, silence. And that silence knew me, not in a nostalgic, dreamy way, in a way that remembered, like a lover you hadn't kissed in a long time, but still knew how your breath shifted just before you said their name. I closed my eyes and let the wall hold me. Then came the sound, not a door creaking open, not footsteps, just fabric, that soft, unmistakable sound of cotton on skin, a shirt sliding off, a sleeve falling, and I didn't have to look to know what he was doing. He was taking off that worn, grey t-shirt, the one I used to steal when I slept over, oversized, smelling faintly of him and the cedar drawer it lived in. It was the one he never let anyone else borrow, except me. Then his voice, quiet, rough. Do you want it back? I froze. My throat worked around a response, but none came. So instead, I pushed the door open just slightly, and there he stood, bare-chested now, holding the shirt in one hand, not offering it, not teasing, just showing it, like a relic, like something that still held my shape in its fibers. I stepped inside without knowing why, not fully. I just needed to feel the way the floor still creaked under my weight, needed to hear the door click shut again behind me, like it used to. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The space between us was already a conversation. You kept it? I asked, staring at the shirt. I didn't mean to, he replied. I raised an eyebrow. He smirked. It was under my pillow for weeks. I didn't notice until I rolled onto it one night. Thought it was you. That undid me. Not the confession, but the image of him sleeping alone, turning in his sheets, half asleep, half remembering, finding me beneath his pillow. He extended the shirt, not urgently, not insistently, just open-palmed. And I took it, not because I needed it, because I missed what it felt like to hold something that once held me. You can stay, he said, if you want. It wasn't a question or a seduction, just a gentle allowance, like he'd already made peace with whatever I chose. But I didn't answer. Instead, I walked past him, through the hallway, past the mirror I used to check my lipstick in, into the bedroom. Still the same bedding, same books on the nightstand, same low lamp with the bench shade I always threatened to replace. And on the dresser, a small bottle, my perfume. 3 spritzes left, maybe 2. He never threw it out. I sat on the edge of the bed, the cotton of the shirt in my lap, and I realized something. He hadn't said don't go that night I left, not with words, but he had, with everything else, with the way his hand stayed on the small of my back a second too long, with how he watched me walk down the hall, but didn't shut the door until he couldn't see me anymore. He had let me go, but only because I hadn't asked to stay. Do you want tea? He asked now, from the doorway. I laughed, softly. That's what you're offering me. He shrugged, smiling. It's what I know how to make, and it's still warm. I nodded. Okay. And there, in that moment, with a shirt in my lap and silence between us that somehow felt less lonely, I knew I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. The tea was awful, too strong, too bitter. He'd never learned how long to leave the bag in, but I drank it anyway, because it was warm, because it was quiet, because the way he watched me from across the kitchen made it feel like we hadn't burned years in between, just minutes. He leaned against the counter, barefoot, still shirtless, the way he always was when we talked too long into the night. There was a time I thought I loved him only like that, in the half-light, in the in-between hours, when conversation was unhurried and we weren't either. I wore this once, I said, looking down at the shirt in my lap. He nodded. Twice, actually. You fell asleep in it and then left wearing it the next morning. I looked up. He remembered. God. He remembered everything. You let me take it, I said. No, he smiled. You said, I'm taking this, and I didn't stop you. I laughed. He always let me get away with too much. That might have been the problem. The silence came back, but softer now. Less like a wall, more like a blanket. There was something about being in this apartment again that made the rest of my life feel far away. The job, the expectations, the man I was supposed to be calling back. None of it fit here. But this shirt still did. I stood up slowly, and with one long breath, pulled it over my head. It smelled like wood, like time, like him. When I turned, he was staring, not at my body, at the shirt, at the way it slid down my frame, at the memory it carried, at the version of me that only ever existed here, in this room, in that cotton, in this moment. I kept it, he said quietly, because I knew if I threw it out, it'd be like saying none of it mattered. I swallowed hard. You still think it did? He didn't answer with words. He just walked toward me, slow, certain, and stopped just close enough that I had to tilt my chin to meet his eyes. He reached out, not to touch my skin, but to fix the way the collar sat. Just that. That tiny, familiar gesture, the one he used to do every time I stole his clothes and wore them too low, too loose. I liked you better in my things, he murmured. You never looked more like yourself. I closed my eyes because it hurt how much that felt true. When I opened them, he was closer, not touching. But the air between us was humming now, tight, tangled, thick with the weight of all the things we never finished saying. You okay? He whispered. I nodded, too fast. He waited, then, you're not, and I wasn't. I wasn't okay at all. I didn't come here to start anything, I said. I know. I missed who I was when I was here. That broke him a little. He looked down, hands in his pockets, voice low. I missed her too. I stepped back, breathing like it hurt, because it did. And still, I stayed. In his shirt, in his space, in the past, bleeding softly into the present. Do you want me to stay tonight? I asked. The question hung there like steam. He looked up, searched me. I want you to stay, he said, if it's you who wants to. Not the girl you were then. Not the part of you that's running from something else. I'm not running. He smiled gently. You are. But I'll take whatever part of you sits still long enough to drink my terrible tea. I exhaled, sharp, shaky. Then I walked toward the couch, sat down, let the silence fill again. He joined me, not touching, not speaking, just there. And that was enough. The night deepened. The world beyond his windows blurred, time folded, and somewhere between one breath and the next, I leaned against his shoulder. He let me, like he always did. I woke up before him. The first thing I noticed was the quiet, the kind that settles only after something's been said, or finally not said, and understood anyway. His shoulder was still warm from where I'd fallen asleep. His chest rising, falling, steady, calm. The same rhythm I remembered tracing once with my finger, back when I still thought I needed to explain why I had to leave. Now, there was nothing to explain. I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake him. The apartment smelled like rain on concrete, like old books, and him. Always him. That scent I once carried home with me in his shirt. And last night, in him. I walked into the kitchen and boiled the kettle. Same chipped mug, same ridiculous tea, same sound of silence wrapping around a morning that didn't ask to be defined, just felt. He emerged 10 minutes later, scratching the back of his neck, barefoot, hair a mess, face soft with sleep. He paused in the doorway when he saw me, the way his eyes landed on mine, not surprised, not stunned, just there, like I'd always belonged in that kitchen, like I never should have left. You stayed, he said. I nodded, holding up his favorite mug. Only for the tea. That made him smile. You always were a bad liar. He took the mug and sat opposite me. No words for a while. Just sips. Then he said, You don't owe me anything. It hit harder than I expected. I set my cup down. I know, I said, but maybe I want to give you something anyway. He tilted his head. Like what? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached across the table, took his hand, and laid it gently over the hem of his shirt I was still wearing. Then I said, This is me. Not the old me. Not the version you remember. Just who I am now. He looked down at where our hands met, ran his thumb along the cuff. You don't have to stay, he said, even softer. But if you do, I need you to mean it. I swallowed. I'm not good at meaning things. Not the first time around. He met my eyes, then mean them this time. I stood up, walked slowly to the edge of the couch where I'd left my purse, dug inside, pulled out his letter, the one I wrote months ago and never sent, creased, worn, still sealed. I wrote this, I said, After I saw you in the bookstore, with her. He blinked, waited. I never mailed it because I thought maybe what we had should just stay in the past, like a good scene in a movie you don't rewind. I handed it to him. He didn't open it, just held it. Quiet, heavy, careful, like it meant more than I knew. Then he said something I'll never forget. You always think too much about endings. And maybe he was right. Because for once, I didn't want to walk out that door with a line, or a wave, or a goodbye that tied everything up in a neat little bow. I just wanted to be here, still in his shirt, still in his mourning, still in whatever this was, even if it had no name. I can't promise I'll stay, I finally said, but I can promise I'll stop leaving. He stood, walked toward me, slipped the letter into the back pocket of his jeans, and then, finally, touched me. Not with hunger, not with possession, but with remembrance, and something quieter than love, but stronger. He tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, said, "Okay," and kissed me, soft, slow, like the first time we did, years ago, on this exact floor, before anything had gone wrong. And I kissed him back, not to reclaim something, but to tell him, without words, that I remembered too. Every breath, every silence, every time he said don't go without ever saying it. We didn't plan the rest of the day or the next. He just poured more tea, and I stayed in his shirt. That night, I lay next to him again, skin to skin this time, and whispered the thing he needed to hear, the thing I needed to hear myself say. I'm still here, and he didn't say anything back. He just pressed his forehead to mine, let the dark hold us, and let the story go on. I hadn't seen him in 4 years, and yet when the door to the cabin opened, and he stood there, same eyes, same quiet mouth, same way of standing too still, like he was bracing for something. It was like time hadn't passed, except, of course, it had. The cold wind outside swirled a few strands of my hair forward, and he looked at them, not at me, like he was seeing ghosts in the movement. He didn't say my name, just stepped aside, letting me in, like he always did. Inside the cabin, it smelled like firewood and forgotten seasons. There were books on the floor, half-packed bags near the door, and one of those wool blankets he used to wrap me in after long drives. I didn't ask if I was early. I didn't ask if I was supposed to come at all, because we both knew why I was here. I thought you weren't coming, he said quietly. I thought so too, I replied. He nodded once, then turned away, already walking toward the kitchen. Like if he moved too slowly, I might change my mind again and vanish. There were no hellos, no apologies, only the sound of water boiling and a glass clinking on the counter. He made tea, not because I liked it, but because he remembered I didn't like coffee. He still remembered. We sat by the fire, 2 mugs, 2 people who had once known how to talk, but now only knew how not to. I watched the flames lick the old brick. Then him, always him. His eyes always glancing toward the floor, like they couldn't meet mine without something breaking. I'm leaving tomorrow, he said suddenly. Where to? He shrugged. North, then maybe east. I don't know, somewhere quiet. I should have said something then, like I'm glad you called, or I wish you'd told me sooner, or even just why now. But I didn't, because part of me was still that girl on his porch at 2 a.m., coat unzipped, waiting to be let in and not knowing if I even wanted to be. He turned to face me, finally. And that's when he reached out. Not for my face, not for my hand, but for my hair. He touched it like it was breakable, like it was his last chance to memorize how it curled behind my ear, or how soft it stayed no matter how many years passed. His fingers hovered, then landed, barely brushing against a lock that had slipped forward over my collarbone. You cut it, he said. I nodded. You used to let me braid it. I still remember how. He smiled. A small, broken thing that made my heart twist in the exact place it had twisted the night we ended. And then he said it, the line I didn't expect, the line that undid me more than a confession ever could. I asked you here so I could say goodbye while you still felt like mine. The fire popped, wood splitting with the weight of silence. And I looked at him, really looked, and saw all the versions of him I'd ever known. The boy who read poetry in the rain, the man who waited for me to choose him, the stranger who let me go without asking why. I don't know if I still do, I whispered. Still what? Feel like yours, he nodded. I don't either, but I wanted to see if I'd know. He leaned forward, not to kiss me, not to hold me, but to breathe me in. And in that inhale, I felt more naked than I ever had undressing for him, because this was the kind of intimacy that didn't require skin, just memory and ache, and too many things left unsaid. I should have pulled away, should have told him this wasn't fair. But instead, I leaned forward too, and we sat there, forehead to forehead, like two people at the edge of a cliff, knowing they wouldn't jump, but also knowing they'd never stop dreaming about what it would feel like if they did. I'm not staying, I whispered. I know, he said, but his hand was still in my hair. When he finally let go, he didn't touch me again for the rest of the night. But that moment, that touch, lingered, like the warmth of sunlight long after the clouds had come in. That night, I slept in the same bed I used to, not with him beside me, but with his presence folded into the sheets, the way silence sometimes settles between two people who still love each other, but know better than to say it aloud. And in the dark, I thought of the way he looked at me before I walked in, like he knew, like he'd always known, that this wouldn't last. But still, he reached for my hair, because some touches are worth remembering, even if they're the last. Morning didn't come gently. It came with the rustle of footsteps across old floorboards, the creak of a kettle being set down too hard, and a door that didn't quite latch when it closed. I stayed in bed a little longer than I should have, not because I was pretending to sleep, but because it felt safer, hiding under a blanket that still carried the smell of him, cedar, ash, and something I couldn't name, but had memorized years ago. I stared at the ceiling and counted the cracks in the paint, like they could explain how we got here. But they didn't. Nothing ever does. He was standing by the window when I came out, coffee in hand, shirt wrinkled, eyes still full of something unslept. He didn't turn around when he said it. I almost didn't call you. I stood there, arms folded across my chest like a shield. But you did, I said. He nodded, still watching the trees outside. They're the only ones who know what we were like. The trees out there. The fog. The bed, I added. He smiled, bitter. That, too. There was something about that morning that didn't feel borrowed. Felt returned. Like we were stepping into a memory too large to keep holding, but too painful to release. I moved toward the table, the one we used to leave notes on. And there it was. A slip of paper, unfolded. His handwriting, messy and angled like always. One line. Did you ever keep the scarf? I looked up. You still remember that? I remember everything I gave you, he said. Especially the things you never gave back. I had the scarf. It was tucked in my bag, worn thin from nights I shouldn't have brought it out, and mornings I wrapped it around my neck just to feel like I hadn't lost everything. I didn't answer, but I didn't need to. He walked over, not close enough to touch, but close enough for me to feel it. That pull, that ache, that space between us that had never really been empty, no matter how far we drifted. Do you still write? He asked. I hesitated. Not about you. That's a lie, he said gently. And he was right, because every sentence I'd written since leaving him had his fingerprints on it. He was in the margins, in the pauses, in the words I chose not to use. I read something the other day, he said. It said people don't fall out of love. They just grow quieter about it. That sounds like something you'd underline in a book, I murmured. He chuckled. I probably did. We stood there, two people who had once known how to kiss without asking, now barely able to breathe in the same direction. You know what this is, don't you? I finally asked. He looked at me. This is the last chapter, I whispered. He nodded once. I know. There was something devastating about agreeing on the ending, like watching the tide roll in, knowing it would take the footprints with it, but standing there anyway. He sat down first. I followed. No more tea, no more fire, just us, facing the weight of things we didn't finish. I kept thinking, he said, if I ever saw you again, I'd kiss your wrist, just once. Why my wrist? Because that's where I used to feel your pulse, when you were on top of me, when we weren't pretending. My breath caught. I didn't say anything. Because how do you reply to something that delicate? How do you answer without breaking the moment? He leaned forward then, and, slow, reverent, took my hand in his, turned it palm up, and pressed his lips to my wrist. It wasn't sexual. It was something worse than that. It was intimate, so soft. It tore something open in me I didn't realize I'd locked shut. I can still feel it, he whispered against my skin. Still feel you. When he let go, it wasn't dramatic. No music, no crying, just space again, the kind that says, we're not strangers, we're something harder. I stood up. So did he, but neither of us moved. Will you write about this? He asked, eyes searching mine. I nodded. But I'll lie, I said. He smiled, just barely. Make me sound taller. I laughed, but it cracked somewhere in my chest. And he looked at me then, really looked, like he was carving me into memory with every blink. Like this was it, the final page. I think I loved you best, he said softly, when you weren't trying to love me back. That line landed like a match against dry wood, because I knew exactly what he meant, and I'd never forgive either of us for it. I picked up my bag. He didn't try to stop me, but as I reached for the door, he stepped behind me, not touching, but close enough to haunt. And then, like a whisper, like a last breath, he said, "You were never mine to lose, were you?" I didn't answer, but I wanted to turn around and say, "No, but you lost me anyway." The cab ride back from the train station was quiet. Rain flicked against the window in a lazy rhythm, like a memory, trying not to be remembered too clearly. I watched the city pass by in fragments, graffiti-stained alleys, neon signs blinking through the dusk, people walking too fast for the hour. He sat beside me, his shoulder just close enough that if I leaned a little, we might touch. But neither of us moved. At the red light, he spoke without turning. "I almost didn't let you in." "I know," I said. "You knew I wouldn't be able to watch you leave again." I didn't answer, because the truth is, I wasn't sure I'd leave this time, and that scared me more than anything. When we got to his apartment, the same one I remembered, though the curtains were new and the books had multiplied, he didn't offer me a drink. He just stood in the entryway like he was unsure whether this was a visit or a goodbye waiting to happen. I stepped out of my shoes, slowly, deliberately, and he noticed. He always noticed. The lamp beside the couch flickered when he turned it on. The room glowed with that kind of warmth that only comes from knowing a space too well. I sat where I used to, same corner of the couch, same cushion that sagged just enough to remember me. "I kept your mug," he said, nodding toward the kitchen. I turned to look. It was there. The white one with the chipped handle and the faint imprint of lipstick I'd never been able to scrub out. "You didn't have to," I murmured. He shrugged. I did. Silence stretched between us like an old sweater, frayed but still wearable. He sat across from me, elbows on knees, hands clasped together, watching me, always watching. "Why did you really come back?" he asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing felt right. "I don't know," I finally whispered. "That's a lie," he said gently. And it was. Because I did know. I'd missed the weight of him beside me in the dark, the way his silence filled rooms like music, the way his hands always knew where I ached before I even said a word. "You want to know the worst part?" I asked. He didn't answer, but he leaned in. "I didn't miss you most when I was alone. I missed you most when I wasn't, when someone else kissed me and it didn't taste like truth. He looked down, that old, beautiful pain in his eyes. When he looked up again, something had shifted. He moved to sit beside me, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel the static hum between our skin. I thought I'd forget what it felt like, he said quietly. What? Your hair in my hands. And just like that, I couldn't breathe. Because I remembered too, the way he used to twist it gently when I fell asleep on his chest, the way he brushed it off my forehead before kissing me like he was asking permission to stay. I didn't stop him when he reached up, fingers moving slowly, reverently. He touched my hair like it was a sacred object, like he didn't deserve to touch it again, but couldn't stop himself. His hand lingered at the nape of my neck, just long enough for my spine to melt. You always smelled like sleep, he whispered. Even when you were leaving. I laughed, soft and sad. I was always leaving, I said. He nodded. I know, but I never learned how to stop hoping you'd come back. His thumb traced the edge of my jaw, and I tilted toward him before I realized I was moving. And then his lips brushed my temple. Not a kiss. Not really. More like a memory, trying to be rewritten. I still dream about that night, he said, voice so low it almost didn't reach me. Which one? You know which one. I did. The one with the open window, the summer rain, the sheets that smelled like skin, and maybe something too close to love. I dream about it too, I said. Except in mine, I stayed. He smiled then, small, broken. But if you had stayed, we wouldn't have this moment now. And maybe this moment is the one that matters. My heart hurt in the strangest way, like it was making room for something I'd buried. He didn't kiss me, and I didn't ask him to. But his hand stayed in my hair, and for a few long minutes, we didn't move. Just sat there, remembering each other. The clock ticked loud in the next room, time, reminding us we had none. I have to go soon, I said eventually. I know. And then, his hand fell from my hair, and that was worse than goodbye. He stood up, crossed to the window, looked out like the city had answers. I stood too, slowly, gathered my coat, my bag, my breath. At the door, I turned back. He was still looking out the window, but I could feel him watching me in the glass. I'll write about this, I said. His voice was barely audible. Make it beautiful. And I would, even if it broke me to do it. I didn't sleep that night. I laid in the hotel bed, too cold, too clean, too far from him, and tried not to replay every second of our goodbye. But of course, I did. The way his fingers slipped from my hair like they were letting go of something they didn't want to. The way he didn't kiss me, even when it felt like the silence begged him to. The way he looked at me through the reflection of the window, as though he was already watching me disappear. The city buzzed beyond the thin hotel walls, but all I could hear was his voice. Make it beautiful. as if turning it into a story would make it hurt less. In the morning, I wrote him a letter I never sent. I folded it once, then twice, and tucked it into the back of my notebook, between scribbled memories and coffee-stained corners. That's where I keep the words I'm too afraid to give away. 2 weeks passed. I didn't text him. He didn't call. But I think we both knew that whatever had happened in his living room, whatever almost happened, would find its way back. Some moments just linger longer than others. Until one night, I walked home from a dinner party, heels clicking on wet pavement, breath fogging in the crisp air, and I passed the bookstore where we first kissed. It was closed, lights out, but I could still see us there. Two people who hadn't yet known how hard it would be to forget each other. I stood there for longer than I meant to, and that's when it happened. A voice behind me, looking for something. I turned around, and there he was. Same coat, same sad smile, but something softer in his eyes, like hope, maybe, or surrender. I wasn't expecting to see you, I whispered. I wasn't expecting to stop, he replied. But then I saw you standing there and his words faded. But I heard the rest anyway. I always stop for you. We didn't hug, didn't touch. We just stood there in the kind of quiet that felt like permission. He reached into his pocket and pulled something out. Folded paper, worn edges, my letter, the one I never sent. You dropped this, he said gently. No, I said. I didn't. He smiled. No, you didn't. I wanted to ask how, when. How long had he carried it? How long had he waited to let me know he still read my voice in ink? But none of that mattered now. What do we do now? I asked. And his answer came so quietly, I almost missed it. We stopped pretending. So we did. Back at his place, everything felt different. Not because the furniture had moved or the light bulbs had dimmed, but because we weren't holding back anymore. He touched my hair again. This time, not like it was the last time, but like it might be the beginning. We didn't speak much. Not when his hands found the zipper of my dress. Not when my fingertips remembered every inch of his back. Not when our mouths met like an old habit we never quite broke. In his bed, with sheets that smelled like every version of us, I rested my head on his chest and said the words I'd waited too long to say. I stayed this time. He ran his fingers through my hair. I know. He didn't ask what came next, and I didn't promise forever. But we both knew. Some people aren't meant to be chapters. They're footnotes that never stop mattering. I fell asleep to the sound of his breath, steady beneath my cheek. The rise and fall of something I'd once walked away from, now holding me in place. In the morning, sunlight painted gold across the room. He was already awake, watching me like I might vanish again. But I didn't. I turned into him, brushed my lips to his collarbone, and whispered, "Touch my hair again, just once more." He did, and this time, it wasn't goodbye. End of story. He touched my hair like he knew it would be the last time.